as we're picking up another part of the Warcry bloodhunt. Last week we did the vampire monks, and this week we're going to tackle a faction that I thought I would never paint, and that is Khorne. After we had all the bloodlust left over from the vampires trying to refrain themselves that last week, this week I find myself screaming, "Blood for the blood god!" So I'm starting all the Khorne models off with this Blood Reaver flesh. Thought it pretty suiting. I wanted that real darker tone to it. I figure it just kind of fits their atmosphere. And I mean, it is called Blood Reaver flesh after all. There's not a whole lot of flesh on these guys, so we're going to move through this part here pretty quick. For the most part, there's a little bit of a neck. They each have a little bit of a torso, and then the hands. Even most of them, most of their face is covered up. And honestly, I think this works out pretty darn good for them. Aesthetically, I love it. This is a beautiful model. Honestly, did not think I'd ever paint Khorne. The person that got me into Warhammer, he ran Khorne. I was like, that's his army. That's his thing. Here I am. Now we're doing a little bit of about a 50-50 mix with that Blood Reaver flesh and the base Buckmans Glow. I think it's just a very natural progression from one to the other. They move very nicely into each other. And there's not a lot of spots to really get hit by the light. So we're just doing real kind of like minimal blending between the two from the one to the other. So really it's the back of the hand, the knuckles, very small amount on the abdomen. And we move through this one again here pretty quick. And the final one is not quite pure Buckmans Glow, but it's pretty darn close to it. We really just hit the tops of the hand now and like the top two knuckles, and that's all we're really doing. Maybe a little hint of a dot on the stomach. Now we are moving over to the metallics. This was pretty interesting. Everybody does the red armor for Khorne, and I wanted to do that, but not quite the same that you see on everything else. So I'm taking a base of lead belcher, and I mixed it pretty good with a noir black from Reaper, and I just got a much darker feeling lead, and I really liked it. I went through and I did a base coat over all the armor with this. I thought it was really fitting, really nice, and left a lot of room to build up and work with after that. So I'm just going to move through. There's a lot of armor on this guy, but really, I like this mix. I'm going to use it a lot more often. One of the struggles was picking out what's going to be this and what's going to be brass. Of course they have to have brass. Now I'm coming in with pure lead belcher, and I'm doing a little bit of a highlight. Really, again, not much. I'm just picking out small parts here and there. There's a fair amount of highlight that's going to go onto the shins, into this piece here on his hip. But in a minute you'll see that kind of gets blended out. Probably could have skipped this step, to be honest. And here is the next one. I thought this would be a really cool way to do it. So this was about a 50-50 mix of contrast of Flesh Terror's red and the contrast medium. And my thought process was only to do it on the tops, the bottoms, and like really drive from where the brass is going to come from next. So I'm working between everything that's going to have brass in it. This doesn't quite work out the way I think it would when we get down to the end, but by the time it was all finished up, really love the way that it turned out. You can take this and just put it over the entire thing if you want to have that red armor and you want to skip trying to do non-metallic metal, or you don't want to use red metallic like a standard red metallic. So I think this is a really great way to achieve that, but I wanted it to be a little bit standard metal and then this. So here I'm driving in and I'm packing that in to where the brass is going to be in a little bit, and then I'm going to pack it around all the areas of the shin. I'll come back a little bit later and really take a fine little approach with a much stronger of the contrast flesh tearers and really hit all the edges to it. So here now I'm bringing it down to the bottom, and I'm working up from the bottom as well. In the end, this part of it here ended up not being my cup of tea, and I'd come back and correct it, and we'll touch on that at the end. But if you dig this, man, go for it. And if you want to do it all that red, yeah, I think that'll look fantastic as well. Be a lot quicker, that's for darn sure. We're just tidying up, going back and a little bit more packed in before we move on to the next step, which is where I take a little bit of that more thicker contrast and just kind of dabble it into all these little spots now, all the little recesses, and that's really going to add that extra layer of depth, especially here where you have a lot of it bleeding down. That's really going to work out in its advantage later on. Now let's move to the next part. I'm going to use a brass scorpion, also by Citadel Games Workshop. I love this brass. It is absolutely fantastic. It shined through really well on this. I thought about going in and doing a little bit of weathering into it, but I really did a bare minimum. I took a black and brown from Reaper and I just dabbed around, kind of watered down, but just dabbed around all the rivets that are on this armor just so there's a little bit of weathering on that part. And the way that this really popped out against the red, of course, it's Khorne. It looks freaking awesome. And it's just such a cool color concept, especially once we get to the axes and you see it built up across everything. And what you see right there is the number one mistake that I had made on so many minis in the past. I go in there with a brush that's just too loaded. So if you ever wonder why you see a ton of people kind of like do a test stroke across their thumb, that's exactly what it is, a test stroke. They're making sure how much paint, if they need more or less, before they go in there. Far too many times I went in there with it just a little bit too loaded and it just blew out. Maybe a little bit too thin down, blew out. Not thin enough, clumped up. Too many variables, so paint yourselves before you paint your minis. And now we're moving on to the back. So I took a German camo. This is by Vallejo. And I think this is pretty cool, like green, brown. And I work it across all the areas. This is an overbrush, it's not really a dry brush. I'm going to hit all the high points of the fur. Now I'm going to mix this in about 50-50, maybe a little bit less with some oxide red. We do a little bit more of a dry brush and a little bit less of an overbrush. And I'm sticking more towards the top now and just hit a little bit at the bottom where you see it kind of flare back out. Now this is mainly oxide red and I'm barely going to hit any of it. And I'm using the side of the brush here, so I'm picking up just the high points. In the end, I noticed that the black darks that I wanted really weren't in this, so maybe my priming wasn't quite enough. I didn't hit it with a good enough coverage. So I'm going to take a black Templar here and I'm going to coat the entire thing with this. I'm going to lose a lot of the work that I just did, but it's completely fine. We can go in and do this again. But what this is going to do is it's really going to make that dark shadow pop out. That's what it was really missing. Is all the recesses were, some of them were showing a little bit more gray than they were black. And on this model in particular, I really wanted the deep contrast. So we'll coat the whole thing, make sure that we really get it in there deep, pack it in there. We're going to let this dry for a little while. We're going to come back and repeat most of the steps that we just did. It's a little bit unfortunate, but I'd rather do that than be a little bit unhappy with it. The skulls, did a huge thing on skulls before. This one's going to be a little bit different. I'm coming with the black and brown, and I'm going to do like 90% coverage on this. You know, I didn't want to do those like stark brown to white skulls that I did on everything else so far, especially not for this like dark, heavy themed character. So I went from a brown to brown. I'm going to finish it with that ash brown. As you'll see here, I'll work through the stages the same way I do on the skulls for the trees and the skulls that are around the vampire. But I'm just starting with a different color combination. And really, you can do any color combination you want for skulls. And this is a pretty good method to work through all those different colors. You know, you can go from a black to brown, very similar to what I just did right here. Hell, you can do a blue to a white skull. That would probably look pretty radical. Maybe a little bit of an alien skull, the reasoning why it's blue. Maybe it's frozen and frosted over. It's something to try out later on. And you can just paint it with an off-white and give it that skeleton horde contrast paint. Done that for plenty of them in the past. Now I'm coming in with that final ashen brown. Hit all those highlights. This has still got a little bit of that black and brown in it. Work through, really just making sure I'm hitting the higher ridges. It's a lot harder to do this when you have such a small skull versus that giant one underneath the tree. So at this point, we're really not working through as many color blends as we were for that. And I lied before, this is actually the last one. This is about a pure ashen brown from Reaper. I love Reaper paints. I think they have a really cool line. Whenever they do their Kickstarters, I try and at least get one of the packs of paint out of it. Lasts me a good while. You see, I just got the ridges of it. He's got a couple cool skulls all around him. So I just got the bridge of the nose, front teeth, around the eye sockets. I'm going to carry that around to all of them. He's got some really cool skulls that are hidden up in that pelt. This is an awesome model. Warcry models are always absolutely fantastic. Now, one of the reasons you'll see that this is a really dark themed model, so that's why I kept that brass scorpion unpatinaed and weathered out. And now we're just going to hit some Glamor Shots. Throw in some blood for the blood god effects on those axes, and here's what you're left with.
Thank you to everyone who's checked out the videos. If you love it, please like it. Even if it was like moderately okay. Like, subscribe, share it away. It's all cool. There's already been like really crazy amount of like awesome comments and feedback and conversations. I love it. Keep it up. If anybody's over on TikTok, just run over there to abuchananas_nomeo dilbo. And if you're on Instagram, that is the next thing I've really got to build up. So that is abuchananas_tabletop. Check it out. I'll usually post like a day ahead of my videos over on Instagram with a little bit of what's going on. Over on TikTok, I try and post 1, maybe 2 times a day. There's a lot of like little snippets that you can see in the long videos here, and then just cool stuff in between. All right, thank you everyone. Buchananas.